Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back to Introduction to Cultural Anthropology. Today we're going to be talking about language, why language is really important, how it allows us to understand the world and be able to describe it, and how language sort of functions within culture, and a little bit about its history. So, first, let's talk about where does language come from. It's believed today that somewhere in the range of about 7,000 languages exist on this planet. That's a lot of languages. Now, as Americans, we are oftentimes exposed to 2 or 3 different languages, right? English, Spanish, French, right? And those are oftentimes taught in school, or if you live in communities where Spanish, because we have a lot of Spanish speakers in this country, that's where we experience usually other languages. That's 2 or 3 out of somewhere in the range of 7,000, right? That's a lot. So we don't see a lot of variation in language as a lot of other communities do. And so it's important to talk about those things to understand where they're coming from, and what we can learn from those other languages, because that is a lot of what we try and do, is learn from language and from folks that see the world differently. So language is a system of communication that uses symbols to convey information. What does that mean? Well, the spoken word, the written word, hand gestures, physical gestures, petroglyphs, pictographs, hieroglyphics, different shapes can convey information, chemical trails, and pheromones, which we don't usually dive into very much, because other species oftentimes use that as their main form of communications, but we do as well include those in language, because certain smells can give indicators of this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, this is a romantic thing, right? So yeah, that we also include. Human language is a complex system that incorporates smaller symbols into larger symbols, into larger abstract ideas, right? We have, say in our language, if we think about English, we have an alphabet, right? Each one of those letters has a specific sound that connects to it. When we combine those different sounds into more complex organization, we have a word. That word is both represented in a written language, but also a verbal language. And then when we combine those words together, we get a sentence, a paragraph, a love story, a space epic, right? Because we can combine all of those individual sounds into much more complex ideas. And that's what gives language so much importance when we think about culture, when we think about people. Okay, so a letter goes into a word, creates that sentence, much bigger idea. We also combine things like hand gestures and body movements to be included in that understanding, in that form of communication and transmitting information. We'll get into that in a little bit. To try and understand the origin of language, a lot of primatologists and linguists have been working with our nearest genetic cousins, right? So we're talking about chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans. They, because genetically are closest relatives, we believe have the capability of showing us what it would have been like from our ancestors who could have developed that same capability of transmitting information. Now, one of the things we have to understand is that none of those, none of the great apes, with the exception of humans, have the same capability of, same physical, biological capability of making all of the sounds that we use, right? The thing that is distinctive about the human species compared to other great apes is the fact that we have the capability of creating these complex sounds. If you look at a gorilla or a chimpanzee, they don't have the focal or linguistic capability because they don't have the capability of making all of those sounds. Their jaw, their tongue, their mouth is not set up in a way to be able to make those complex sounds. So having that capability, which would have developed in us a long, long, long time ago, led to our evolutionary process to where communication became one of our greatest assets. As a species, we're not particularly strong, we're not particularly well protected, we don't have all the things that a lot of other animals have to survive and protect themselves. What we did is we used our brain and created language in which we could coordinate, and through that coordination helped us to survive and evolve to where we are today. Some of the ways that we know that the capability was there is through, again, some of these experiments. You guys have probably heard of Koko the gorilla. Koko was a sort of an experiment in language in which she was taught American Sign Language and became very, very capable at learning a lot of different words, being able to express them, and to be able to coordinate not only that she knew that these words, but was able to put them into sentences to give them meaning, right? So she wanted to, if she was hungry, she could communicate that she was hungry and that she would also like to have this as her food. I think one of the cool things that happened was that Koko had become friends with Robin Williams, right, the comedian and actor, and they had built a friendship. And they would laugh and joke, and they could communicate with each other. And I think one of the important things to understand is that when Robin Williams passed away, the concept of death and loss and those kinds of things are oftentimes associated with humans and having that capability of understanding. But when Koko was told of Robin Williams passing, she became very sad and became very distraught about the fact that she had lost her friend. And she knew what that meant, right? She had the capability to understand how important that person was to her. And that gives a lot of space for us to contemplate how other species deal with communication, and that they're capable of thought and capable of complex understanding. We've been studying other species like dolphins and whales, right? We've been looking at different dolphin pods, right? A pod is a group of dolphins that live together. And one of the things that they've been discovering as they've been following these different pods around is that as they're recording the noises that they make, they've come to discover that it's unique from other dolphin pods from someplace, say, on the other side of the world. These dolphins are making different noises, and they're reacting in different ways. And what that's led to us to believe is that they have different languages from each other, depending on where this group of dolphins grew up and associate with other dolphins in that area, that they are developing language unique to that pod, unique to their dolphin culture. There's an experiment done about, I think, 15 years ago in which they took a couple of dolphins from SeaWorld, and they they said, hey, we want you to do an experiment. So they took these 2 dolphins and they said, okay, you guys, for example, say know 10 tricks. And these trainers would say, okay, go do these tricks. And they would do them in sequence. Well, they told the dolphins that they needed to conduct like 5 different tricks. But the dolphins had to decide what tricks they were going to do and in what sequence. The humans wouldn't give them that information. And I kid you not, these 2 dolphins went underwater and had a short little conversation. And then the pair of them went off and did these 5 tricks. And they did it by coordinating. And to do that, you have to have language. You have to be able to speak and be understood by someone else. There's a recent study done with elephants. And in this study, the researchers were recording the elephants and the noises they were making and then studying those noises. And here's the fascinating thing that took place, is that when certain elephants were sort of dealing with another elephant, they were making specific noises, right? And what these researchers found is that these elephants had given each other names. And they figured this out because what they ended up doing was they had recorded all of these noises that these elephants were doing. They were communicating to each other, but we oftentimes think of them as noises and not language. And they started playing back those individual noises that they believed were connected to specific elephants, their names. And when they played it back to these elephants, that elephant who was just hanging out all of a sudden perked up and looked over and said, oh, you just called my name. And they started doing that with different elephants, and they were, again, gaining their attention. So literally associating this particular sound with these particular elephants, and they'd given each other names. That is complex thought. That is amazing to think about, because again, oftentimes as humans, we associate intelligence with us, and that's what separates us from, all the animals out there. And what we're learning is that language is much more complex than that, and that different species have also had language and is developing these complex ideas and thoughts, and we should recognize that. Okay. So thinking about different species again, let's go back to, say, like chimpanzees and other great apes. We think that they have sort of the intellect of a toddler, okay? A child around 2 to 3 years old, that understands some complex ideas, has a capability of naming and understanding objects, and can have complex emotions that they are capable of expressing, right? And that's kind of where we've seen where, like Coco and other great apes that have been taught sign language and are capable of communicating with humans, that's about the level of intelligence, right? And I'm hesitant to say the term intelligence just because that is something that we put onto other species. So this is their capability as far as communicating with us. So I think that's pretty fascinating to think that if they're our nearest ancestors and we were to go back in time, is this what our ancestors would have, had the capability of knowing and understanding? Now, the important thing to remember about all of this is that the differences between like great apes and our ancestors and us is this biological component, right? We physically can use our mouth and our tongue and be able to create specific sounds with a much higher frequency and capability than, say, the other great apes. They physically can't make those same sounds, right? They are limited by their skeletal structure, by their biology from making those complex noises. Now, if we think about our ancestry, we think about somewhere around 2 million years ago, our ancestors began to have that capability of expanded speech, right? Certainly not what we have today, but the beginnings of it, and that became a defining trait, that language, instead of, getting big muscles and being strong and being able to protect, or huge claws or big gnarly teeth, we started developing communication as a means of survival, both in hunting and protecting ourselves. Because biologically speaking, we're not particularly well put together animals, right? It's our brains that really set us apart. So somewhere around 150,000 years ago, we believe we came to the point where we consider ourselves to be sort of like the modern version of Homo sapien. Some people call it Homo sapien, the wise man, or the wisest of wise men. And we believe that those ancestors, going back 150,000 years, had the same sort of intellectual capacity that we have today. Difference being resources and tools, right? And numbers, right? We have, like today, 8 billion people that live on this planet, all being able to add to the human conversation, which means that we can build things and create ideas and share those ideas and build upon those ideas. When you live in a small population, it takes a long time for those things to develop. If we go back 50,000 years ago, we start seeing some of these complex ideas being recorded, and that's important to recognize. These were cave paintings found in France, depicting different wild beasties that were living on the plains and living in the forests. And these cave paintings were so far back into a cave that no natural light could get there. So it had to all be done by artificial light. So torches, campfires, that kind of stuff. So even the use of artificial light for this process is kind of important to note. But the fact that someone would go in there and remember and imagine these animals that were living contemporaneously with them, and to draw it on the sides of the walls, and these complex ideas of herds and how they interact with other animals, and the detail that went into them, shows that there is some very complex thought going on. And again, thinking about today, in comparison, they weren't technologically savvy. They didn't have all the same stuff that we had, but they had the capability of doing it. And I think that's really important to understand as we have developed into sort of modern humans and what we're capable of, is that we've had that same capability for a long time. Okay, we're going to pause it there, and then we will start on descriptive linguistics. We'll see you in a few minutes.